You wake up in the dark. It smells like wet wool, overcooked onions, and a faint yet unmistakable hint of goat-related disappointment. There's a low crackling sound to your left, a dying fire, probably. Or possibly a rat chewing through something you own. Maybe both. You try to move, but your back has fused to the straw-stuffed mattress, which, fun fact, has not been changed since roughly the Norman conquest. Good morning, peasant. You've been transported to medieval England, which sounds whimsical until you realize there's no Wi-Fi, no toothpaste, and no such thing as basic human rights unless you own land, money, or an army. Your mattress smells like betrayal. And damp. You sit up slowly, brushing twigs out of your hair and contemplating your life choices. You're inside what someone, somewhere, had the audacity to call a cottage. It's mostly timber, moss, and a firm belief in spiritual suffering. There's no door handle, just a crude latch. The walls are decorated with things you assume are herbs, but might just be mold. There's a single stool, one cracked bowl, and a wooden spoon so deeply stained it could be used as forensic evidence. Welcome to the birthplace of your favorite childhood rhymes. No, really. You may not realize this yet, but most of those charming sing-songs you remember from preschool? Yeah, they were born here. In this damp, slightly haunted hut. Not in some bright, cheery Victorian nursery with doilies and tea cakes. Nope. They were whispered, chanted, and passed down by people who lived in mud, died of tooth infections, and thought bathing once a year was a bold lifestyle choice. So before you get comfortable, take a second, just a moment, to like this video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy this kind of weird, slow, historical descent into human absurdity. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's trying to fall asleep to medieval squalor at 3 a.m. Anyway, let's talk about the songs. Nursery rhymes. Innocent, right? Sweet. Harmless. Fun little ditties about eggs and lambs and rings of roses. Except, no, they're not. They're coded messages. Protest songs. Political satire. Thinly veiled threats. Weird social commentaries. Or, occasionally, just glorified descriptions of gruesome historical events rewritten so a 5-year-old could hum them while playing with a dead hedgehog. Let's take a nice slow stroll through the awkward horror show that is medieval children's rhymes. Starting, naturally, with death. Because nothing says bedtime story like a horrifying plague. So, you probably sung it. You know the one. Ring-a-ring-o-roses. A pocket full of posies. Eight-a-shoe. Eight-a-shoe. We all fall down. Charming, yes. Sweet, even. Sounds like a jolly group of children pretending to have hay fever before collapsing in giggles. Except they're not playing. They're dying. This popular rhyme, often falsely attributed to the Black Death, may not have actually originated during the plague years, but it certainly echoes the collective trauma of an entire continent watching 30 to 60% of its population drop like flies. Let's unpack that, slowly. Like a rat-infested blanket. Ring-a-ring-o-roses, that's the rash, the first sign of bubonic plague. A rosy red circle around a darker center. Festive, right? A pocket full of posies, because when your friends and neighbors are decomposing next to you, stuffing flowers in your robes to cover the stench seems like a good idea. Medieval Febreze. Eight-a-shoe. Sneezing. You know, one of the symptoms. We all fall down. And now you're dead. Probably in a ditch. Hopefully with a priest nearby. But given how busy they were at the time, odds are you got skipped. And children sang this. 4 centuries. Played games to it. Danced in circles. Imagine the irony of giggling kids chanting the musical equivalent of a mass grave. It's history's most adorable coping mechanism. But don't worry. It gets worse. Let's talk about Mary, quite contrary. Who's Mary? Well, that depends. Some say it's a metaphor for Catholic repression during the reign of Mary I of England, better known as Bloody Mary. Yes, the one you tried to summon in the mirror at sleepovers. She didn't appear because she was too busy burning Protestants alive and creating poetic symbolism. Mary, quite contrary, she was, especially to Protestant reformers. How does your garden grow? A cutesy phrase, or a reference to the growing number of graves, often in garden-like rows. See, whimsy. With silver bells and cockleshells, these sound like innocent decorations, but many historians believe they were euphemisms. Silver bells might refer to thumbscrews, devices used to crush fingers during interrogation. Cockleshells, possibly torture implements used on, shall we say, more sensitive anatomy. Use your imagination. Or don't. You're trying to sleep. And pretty maids all in a row could be guillotines. Or executioners. Or just a dark little rhyme about conformity enforced with steel and fire. Sleep tight. Moving on. Let's check in on 3 blind mice. Surely that's safe? Nope. 3 blind mice. See how they run. They all ran after the farmer's wife, who cut off their tails with a carving knife. Lovely, that. First off, mice don't generally chase people. So right away, something's off. Unless the mice represent something else. Most scholars suspect the mice were actually noblemen, specifically 3 Protestant bishops who opposed Queen Mary's religious policies. They were eventually executed in a rather unpleasant fashion. So the farmer's wife? That's Mary again. You'll notice she shows up a lot, probably because people were trying to talk about her without getting set on fire. The carving knife? Symbolic. Maybe. Or not. Again, this is a period when metaphors were the safest way to express opinions without being publicly disemboweled. But it's not just queens and plague. Sometimes, rhymes reflect the glamorous world of livestock disease. You know the song. Bah, bah, black sheep. Have you any wool? Sounds like something you'd chant while frolicking through a pastoral meadow with little concern for tax policy. But that's what it's about. In the 13th century, England was heavily reliant on its wool trade. Wool was everything. Like the medieval version of Bitcoin, only fluffier and more irritating to wear. King Edward I imposed a harsh wool tax. Basically, 1/3 of all wool profits had to go to the king, 1/3 to the church, and only 1/3 to the actual shepherd. You can see how that might ruffle some tunics. So, yes sir, 3 bags full. 1 for the master. 1 for the dame, and 1 for the little boy who lives down the lane. The master, the king, the dame, the church, the little boy, probably the overworked, underpaid peasant who actually raised the sheep and now gets 1 bag of itchy leftovers. This is literally a socialist critique wrapped in sheep's clothing. And they made children sing it, repeatedly, with smiles. Back in your medieval hut, the fire has gone out completely. It's fine. You weren't using your toes anyway. The wind rattles through the wall gaps and your water bucket now has ice on it. Time to snuggle under your disease blanket and consider the fact that London Bridge is falling down is also not about architecture, but about blood. London Bridge is falling down. Falling down. Falling down. Yes, it did fall down. Several times. That bridge had a rough life. Fires, collapses, Viking attacks, more fires, general incompetence. But there's also a theory, deeply creepy, that the bridge stayed standing thanks to human sacrifice. Like, literal human sacrifice. Supposedly, they'd bury a child alive in the foundations to keep the structure strong. There's no definitive proof of this, but it's not exactly out of line with medieval building codes, which mostly involve prayer and guesswork. So when kids sing about building it up with wood and clay or iron and steel, it's possibly referencing the many failed attempts, and maybe, just maybe, the idea that what really held it together was terror and bones. Again, children, singing this, while holding hands. Sleep well. You roll over on your straw mattress, which is now 80% dust and 20% flea. You try to remember what modern pillows feel like. You try not to think about the chamber pot, or the fact that someone once used it to dye yarn. Multitasking. Here's a cheerier one. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. You're picturing an egg. Of course you are. Because that's what the illustrations have trained you to believe. But the rhyme never says egg. Not once. No yolk. No shell. Just a dude, or maybe a thing, sitting on a wall and then catastrophically failing to remain upright. One theory is that Humpty Dumpty was actually a cannon, used during the English Civil War, possibly in the Siege of Colchester in 1648. There was a large cannon mounted on a wall until the wall was destroyed and the cannon fell. And, as the rhyme goes, all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. because you can't glue artillery back together with optimism. But let's not forget the most hardcore of all nursery rhymes. The sleeper hit of historical masochism. Old Mother Hubbard. This one is supposedly just about a woman going to a cupboard for her dog. Except, she has no food. And her dog? Dead. Or dressed in strange clothing. Or riding a goat. Or drinking wine. The original versions go on for dozens of verses, most of which read like fever dreams from a medieval stress coma. Old Mother Hubbard was probably a veiled dig at the state of poverty and famine. Or at Cardinal Wolsey. Depending on which academic theory you subscribe to and how many conspiracy theories you can tolerate after midnight. Either way, it's a story about neglect, loss, and hallucination, dressed up as a poem about pets. It's what happens when you try to joke your way through starvation. At this point, your eyes are heavy, or maybe just caked in soot. You reach for your blanket, which smells like centuries of poor decisions and expired cheese. Outside, the wind howls through the trees. Or possibly that's a leper. Hard to say. Your final thought before drifting off? Hey diddle diddle. A rhyme so random it defies all logic. The cat plays a fiddle. The cow jumps over the moon. The dish runs away with the spoon. No one knows what it means. Some say it's code for political scandals. Others believe it's nonsense designed to distract children from the existential horror of daily medieval life. Like performance art, but with livestock. And that's the thing, really. These rhymes? They were never just for children. They were for the adults who had to live through all of it, who had no freedom of speech, no therapy, and no way out except to sing and laugh and pass along just enough memory to make sure the next generation knew where they came from. Even if they had to disguise it as a song about chic, good night, or good morning, or whatever strange hour you find yourself in, wondering why you ever thought nursery rhymes were innocent. You wake up to the sound of chickens arguing. It's unclear what they're arguing about, because they are chickens, but the intensity suggests it's something deeply personal, maybe the ethics of worm hoarding, or who gets to sleep nearest the worm go tonight. Either way, it's loud. You roll over in your straw cocoon, stiff as a 12th century tax collector, and remember with sudden horror that you're still in medieval England. No hot shower. No microwave. And absolutely no mattress that doesn't smell like it was used in a Viking raid. Outside your window, which is just a hole in the wall with some pig intestine stretched across it, the sun has risen. You think. It's hard to tell, because the sky is the color of wet bread and the air smells like dung stew. There's probably a local superstition about this exact kind of morning. Something like, when the cow sneezes on the fourth bell, the spirits demand a beetroot. You sit up slowly, wiping soot from your face with a rag that may have once been your only shirt. It's time to continue our charming stroll through the sinister, strange, and sarcastically horrifying world of medieval nursery rhymes. Because what better way to start your day than learning how the cheerful songs of your childhood were born from betrayal, bloodshed, and the slow decline of civilization. Let's begin, appropriately, with a story about a crooked man. There was a crooked man, and he walked a crooked mile. He found a crooked sixpence upon a crooked stile. He bought a crooked cat, which caught a crooked mouse. And they all lived together in a little crooked house. How charmingly deranged. The whole thing sounds like the fever dream of someone who drank turnip wine and got lost in a hedge. But underneath this seemingly innocent rhyme is, once again, politics. Because if you haven't noticed yet, everything in the medieval world is about politics. Or disease. Or both. The crooked man is believed to represent either King Charles I or a Scottish general named Sir Alexander Leslie, depending on which historian you ask and how bored they were that day. In one interpretation, the rhyme is an allegory for the uneasy alliance between England and Scotland. The crooked stile may be a border marker, a metaphor for the jagged, unsteady peace between the two nations after the 17th century wars of the Three Kingdoms. The sixpence? Possibly symbolic of economic compromise. The crooked house? That's Great Britain. Still standing, but barely. Slightly off-kilter. Smelling faintly of old cheese. And they all live together. In mutual passive aggression. The rhyme sounds lighthearted. But imagine chanting that while your village is smoldering in the distance, and your king just got executed for treason. It's a vibe. Now let's talk about Little Jack Horner. Little Jack Horner sat in the corner, eating a Christmas pie. He put in his thumb and pulled out a plum and said, "What a good boy am I." Innocent? Almost too innocent. This one sounds like a toddler boasting about their snack. But surprise, it might actually be about political corruption. Because of course it is. This is medieval England. Even pies were political. According to some historians and probably a few gossip-loving monks, Jack Horner was based on a real person, Thomas Horner, steward to the last abbot of Glastonbury. When Henry VIII was dissolving the monasteries, which is a polite way of saying seizing their land and kicking everyone out, the abbot allegedly tried to bribe the king by sending him a pie. Inside this pie? Legal documents for 12 manor houses. Because what else are you going to bake into your pastry during a political crisis? Raisins? Please. But according to legend, Horner opened the pie, removed one of the property deeds, the plum, and kept it for himself. Hence the whole thumb thing. It's not about fruit. It's about theft. Subtle, edible theft. Imagine you're a child in 1450, joyfully singing a song about land fraud while playing with a stick and pretending not to have scurvy. That's the medieval childhood experience in a nutshell. Now, speaking of Christmas pies, let's journey to another classic, pat a cake, baker's mun. Pat a cake, baker's mun. Bake me a cake as fast as you can. Pat it and prick it and mark it with B. And put it in the oven for baby and me. Sweet, soft, delicious. Or, is it? First, consider that in medieval times, baking was not a cute domestic activity. It was a full-contact sport. You didn't bake at home, not unless you wanted to accidentally burn your house down, which was 50% thatched roof and 50% dried grass. Instead, you took your dough to the local baker, who had a communal oven. But there was a catch. You had to mark your loaf. Literally, people used their initials or symbols to identify whose sad lump of barley mush was whose. Hence the mark it with B. Because if you didn't, the baker might accidentally keep the best loaf for himself. Now imagine the tension in that bakery. 20 furious villagers all side-eyeing their loaves, waiting to see if their barley brick made it through the fire intact. Half of them probably believed a cursed loaf could ruin your week. The rhyme also possibly functioned as a counting game, a way for parents to keep their toddlers calm while they waited 2 hours for their bread to be returned, hopefully without a rat baked into it. Let's press forward, because you're clearly still awake, and there's plenty more to make you question everything you learned in kindergarten. Next stop, goosey, gander. Goosey, gander. Whither shall I wander? Upstairs and downstairs. And in my lady's chamber. There I met an old man, who wouldn't say his prayers. So I took him by the left leg, and threw him down the stairs. This is not a nursery rhyme. This is a crime scene. Seriously, let's unpack that. You're wandering through a noblewoman's house, encounter a man who refuses to pray, and your solution is physical assault. By the left leg, no less. It's a very specific visual. So what's it about? Well, possibly the persecution of Catholics under the reign of Protestant monarchs. Specifically, the idea that priests were being hunted down and dragged from hiding places in people's homes, including priest holes, tiny secret chambers built into walls or staircases. Refusing to say Protestant prayers in English? That was a big no-no. Being Catholic in the wrong town at the wrong time could result in fines, imprisonment, or worse. So this rhyme might be describing a priest being forcibly dragged out of hiding and hurled down the stairs for noncompliance. You know, bedtime fun for all ages. Also, some scholars argue that goose was 17th century slang for prostitutes. So if you want to get extra dark about it, the lady's chamber might not be her dressing room. It might be her work office. Let's say that. Medieval nursery rhymes, where subtle religious commentary and euphemistic sex work collide in a song for toddlers. Let's pivot to something lighter. Lucy Locket lost her pocket. Kitty Fisher found it. Not a penny was there in it. Only ribbon round it. So simple. So breezy. So judgmental. This rhyme is a bit of historical gossip. Lucy Locket and Kitty Fisher were both real women, likely courtesans or mistresses in 18th century London society. Losing a pocket wasn't about misplacing your pants accessory. In those days, women's pockets were separate garments, tied around the waist under their skirts. You had to reach through a slit to get to them. A mildly impractical system unless you were very skilled or very bored. Losing a pocket might suggest poverty, or promiscuity, or possibly just bad stitching. Kitty Fisher, on the other hand, was famous for being, how shall we put this, professionally gifted. She was renowned for her style, wit, and ability to manipulate wealthy men into funding her lifestyle. Basically the Kim Kardashian of Powdered Wig London. So when Kitty finds Lucy's pocket, and it has no money, only ribbon, it's a thinly veiled jab. You poor thing. You've got nothing but trimmings. Meanwhile, I'm dining with dukes. It's like Mean Girls, but sung by preschoolers. Now, you may be thinking, surely there's one rhyme that's truly innocent. Just one. Something wholesome. Something pure. Let me introduce you to Rockabye Baby. Rockabye Baby, on the treetop. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall. And down will come baby, cradle and all. This is, without exaggeration, a lullaby about a baby plummeting to their death. No hidden metaphors. No royal scandal. Just gravity and poor parenting decisions. Why is the baby in a tree? Unknown. Why is no one catching it? Unclear. Was this written by someone who hated babies, trees, or both? Possibly. Some versions suggest it's a metaphor for the instability of monarchy, the baby being a symbol of the heir, teetering on a fragile branch of power. Others think it's just a warning, don't put babies in trees. Which is fair? Either way, it is not calming. Picture this, you're a 4-year-old in 1350, tucked into a straw mattress next to your 8 siblings, and your mother, exhausted, lice-ridden, slightly drunk on ale because water isn't safe, sings you to sleep with a cheerful little song about falling out of an arboreal cradle. It explains a lot about historical personality development. Let's end this chapter with a seasonal special. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. And a Happy New Year. Now bring us some figgy pudding. Now bring us some figgy pudding. Now bring us some figgy pudding. And bring it right here. We won't go until we get some. You get the idea. This is not a carol. This is a threat. Originating in the 16th century, this song was sung by lower-class carolers who would go door to door, singing loudly and demandingly until the rich people inside gave them food, or booze, or money, or all three. Figgy pudding was not sweet. It was a meat and fig sludge, like fruitcake's mean older cousin. And when they say, we won't go until we get some, that's not a polite request. That's aggressive Christmas extortion. Imagine if every holiday season, a group of unwashed locals came to your front door, belted out a few rhymes, then flat out refused to leave until you handed over your last ham. That's the spirit of this song. That's the true meaning of medieval Christmas. You lie back now, exhausted, mentally curled in a fetal position beneath your flea-infested woolen shroud. The fire is a pile of ash. Your feet are numb. A small beetle is attempting to colonize your ear. And still, somewhere outside, a child is singing, Ring-a-ring-o-roses. Because that's how history works. We chant our tragedies. We pass down the horror in rhyme and verse, softening it just enough for the next generation to hum it while skipping through plague fields. Sweet dreams. You wake up shivering. Again. Your blanket, if it can be called that, is a stiff canvas sack stuffed with goat hair and the smell of regret. Your breath fogs in the air, which is notable because you're indoors. Technically, the walls are more whole than wood, and the roof weeps gently into your soup bowl, which, ironically, contains no soup. Just yesterday's turnip rind and what might be a beetle with tenure. You swing your feet off the edge of your bed, which is less bed and more pile of hay someone once sneezed on in 1312, and begin the daily ritual of checking your limbs for frostbite, plague symptoms, or medieval roommates. They bite. You don't ask questions. It's a new day. And you know what that means, more horrifying tales hiding in cheerful childhood rhymes. Because what better way to start the morning than by dismantling your most comforting memories one verse at a time. Let's begin with a classic, Merry, Merry, quite contrary. Merry, merry, quite contrary. How does your garden grow? With silver bells and cockle shells, and pretty maids all in a row. Ah, sounds lovely. A woman tending to her peaceful garden, perhaps with some ornamental shells and some sort of agricultural pride. Except, no. Mary is not the friendly neighborhood horticulturalist. She is very likely Mary the First of England, also known as Bloody Mary, not because she loved tomato juice, but because she had a mild tendency to burn Protestants alive. Contrary? Oh yes. She was very contrary. Especially if you tried to practice a religion that wasn't Catholicism during her 5-year reign. Now, the garden in question? Probably not a literal patch of petunias. Most scholars agree it's a metaphor for graveyards. Specifically, the ones filling up rapidly under Mary's regime. Silver bells and cockle shells? Not garden decorations. These are believed to be torture devices. Silver bells were thumbscrews, charming little gadgets designed to crush your fingers like overripe plums. Cockle shells. Some believe they were tools used on other regions. For heretics. Or possibly symbols of forced conversions. And the pretty maids all in a row? Guillotines. Or executioner's assistants. Or rows of women being led to their deaths. You know, bedtime stuff. So next time you hear that sung sweetly by a toddler in a playground, remember, they're singing a tribute to political executions and the cozy sound of Protestant screams. But don't worry. It gets worse. Let's move on to 3 blind mice. 3 blind mice, 3 blind mice. See how they run, see how they run. They all ran after the farmer's wife, who cut off their tails with a carving knife. Did you ever see such a sight in your life? As 3 blind mice. Now, this one should set off alarms immediately. Let's recap. 3 visually impaired rodents are violently mutilated by a woman wielding kitchenware. And we taught this to children, often with hand motions. Delightful. So who are the mice? According to some interpretations, they're actually 3 Protestant noblemen who opposed Queen Mary I. Yes, her again. Specifically, they might refer to the Oxford martyrs, Hugh Latimer, Nicholas Ridley, and Thomas Cranmer. They were blind in the sense that they refused to see the true faith, Catholicism, and they were mice because, well, they were being hunted. The farmer's wife? Mary herself. Because nothing screams domestic stability like executing your political enemies and turning them into poetic rodent metaphors. The tail cutting is believed to be symbolic, not literal dismemberment, but the stripping of power, position, and eventually, life. Of course, if you're a bored medieval child, it's just a catchy little song about mouse mutilation. Fun. You might be wondering at this point, did any nursery rhyme come from something nice? Let's find out by examining Ba, black sheep. Ba, black sheep. Have you any wool? Yes, sir, 3 bags full. 1 for the master, 1 for the dame, and 1 for the little boy who lives down the lane. A charming tale of ovine generosity? Not exactly. This one dates back to the 13th century and is widely believed to be a protest against the wool tax imposed by King Edward I. That's right, it's economic satire. The master gets 1 bag. The dame gets another. And the poor little boy, possibly representing the farmer or the shepherd, gets nothing. Just a sore back and a strong sense of fiscal injustice. Wool was England's primary export during the medieval period. In fact, it was so valuable that entire wars and trade policies revolved around it. Which is why the government wanted their slice. Up to 1/3 of all wool went to the crown. You weren't just shearing sheep. You were bleeding money. In some early versions of the rhyme, the final line was more bleak, but none for the little boy who cries down the lane. But I guess that didn't test well with toddlers, so they gave him a bag just to shut him up. So the next time you think Ba Black Sheep is about barnyard generosity, remember, it's about taxation without representation and the economic despair of the peasant class. Now, are you still feeling nostalgic? Great. Let's dig even deeper into the well of childhood trauma with London Bridge is falling down. London Bridge is falling down. Falling down, falling down. London Bridge is falling down. My Fair Lady. Such a cute little song. Surely this one is just about construction? Oh, how innocent. The truth is that London Bridge really did fall down. Repeatedly. Like a drunk man at a Renaissance festival. The bridge was made of timber and was constantly collapsing, burning, or just generally deciding that gravity was optional. The rhyme is a record of structural failure across generations. But that's not all. Some darker theories suggest something much more unsettling: human sacrifice. There's a legend, completely unsupported, but alarmingly popular, that the foundations of London Bridge were strengthened by burying children alive in the pillars. As in, literally encasing their little bodies in the bridge to appease the gods of architecture or whatever horrifying spirit governed masonry at the time. Is it true? Probably not. But that didn't stop people from whispering about it for centuries. And of course, if there's even a 2% chance it's true, you can bet it was immortalized in a catchy rhyme for kids to sing while skipping rope. Because what else is childhood for, if not the light ritualization of possible murder? Let's cleanse the palate with Old Mother Hubbard. Old Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard to get her poor dog a bone. But when she got there, the cupboard was bare, and so the poor dog had none. Seems straightforward. A woman can't feed her dog. Sad, but harmless. Or, it's another political allegory. Some believe Old Mother Hubbard is actually a thinly veiled jab at Cardinal Wolsey, the advisor to Henry VIII. The cupboard is England's store of Catholic power. The dog is the king, hungry for a divorce. Wolsey went to the Pope, the cupboard, to ask for a bone, an annulment, and came back empty-handed. Hence, the poor dog, Henry, got mad and formed his own church. As you do. It's speculative, of course. But in a world where bakers were hiding land deeds in pies, and queens were symbolized by carving knife-wielding mouse hunters, it's not the most absurd theory. Still awake? Impressive. Let's hit you with something slightly more surreal. Hey diddle diddle. Hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle. The cow jumped over the moon. The little dog laughed to see such sport, and the dish ran away with a spoon. This one seems safe. Nonsense, even. Surely just whimsical gibberish? Probably, yes. But even nonsense has a backstory. Some scholars argue that this rhyme was coded political satire, mocking specific nobles or scandals in court. Others suggest it was a parody of astronomical events, pagan festivals, or, my personal favorite, it was just a result of too much ale and boredom. Because if you think about it, this is what happens when a medieval poet runs out of metaphors and starts anthropomorphizing tableware. But don't sleep on the dish and spoon subplot. That's a romantic elopement. They ran away together, possibly to avoid the harsh moral judgments of early cutlery society. Forbidden love in the kitchen drawer. You settle back down now, your eyes heavy, your brain slowly succumbing to the warm fog of nonsense. Outside, the wind moans softly. Or maybe it's just a neighbor being exorcised. Hard to say. You've learned tonight that sheep don't want to share. Mice are political prisoners. Babies fall from trees with alarming regularity. Queens are terrifying. And food might contain legal contracts. Sweet dreams, little listener. Try not to think about the bridge supports or the nursery rhymes being gently chanted by candlelight in some haunted Tudor bedroom. And whatever you do, don't look under your mattress. That's where the crooked man sleeps. You wake up to the sound of scratching. Not the poetic, metaphorical scratching of history clawing at your subconscious, but literal scratching. Something is under your bed. Possibly a rat. Possibly regret. Possibly your landlord collecting overdue taxes in the form of toenail clippings. You sigh and pull the wool blanket, which has the consistency of dried lichen and the warmth of a disappointed father, over your face. It's still dark outside. Of course it is. Because in medieval times, sunrise was more of a polite suggestion than a guarantee. Your breath forms tiny clouds in the air. You stare up at the ceiling, which is only mildly on fire from the candles someone forgot to snuff. A charming way to start the day. But we're not here to complain. No, we're here to explore the weirdly violent, suspiciously cheerful, and legally questionable world of nursery rhymes. Let's pick up where we left off, shall we? You ever heard of Georgie Porgy? Georgie Porgy, pudding and pie, kissed the girls and made them cry. When the boys came out to play, Georgie Porgy ran away. Cute, right? Until you realize Georgie is basically the medieval version of that weird guy who insists on surprise kissing people at parties and then bolts when someone his own size shows up. Now, historians have several theories about who Georgie really was, and spoiler alert, none of them are romantic heroes. One popular theory says George Villiers, 1st Duke of Buckingham, a favorite, and possibly more than favorite, of King James I, was the original Georgie. Known for being rather forward with the ladies of court and equally skilled at dodging consequences. Charming. Until he wasn't. He was eventually assassinated, but not before earning a reputation as someone who didn't take no for an answer, especially if you were politically useful or inconveniently married. The pudding and pie might refer to the luxuries and bribes he used to get his way. The tears? Political scandal. Or actual tears. It's the 1600s, both are on the menu. So if you're wondering why your toddler is skipping around gleefully singing about a serial groper with a dessert fixation, well, now you know. Moving swiftly along, let's talk about a rhyme that has the energy of a medieval HR violation. Goosey goosey gander. Goosey goosey gander. Whither shall I wander? Upstairs and downstairs. And in my lady's chamber. There I met an old man, who wouldn't say his prayers. So I took him by the left leg, and threw him down the stairs. There is a lot to unpack here. We begin with a goose. Then suddenly, you're wandering freely through a noblewoman's bedroom, assaulting elderly men who failed to meet your religious expectations. Standard Tuesday stuff. This rhyme is believed to be tied to the religious persecutions of Elizabethan England, particularly the hunting of Catholic priests who were hiding in wealthy homes. Remember, during the reign of Elizabeth I, Catholics were considered dangerous, subversive, and possibly contagious. If you were found conducting Catholic Mass in secret, you could be executed, or at least given an aggressive staircase exit. Wouldn't say his prayers likely refers to those who refuse to use the official Book of Common Prayer required by law. So the guy in the rhyme? Probably a priest in hiding. And what about the lady's chamber? Could be literal. Many upper-class homes had priest holes, secret compartments built to hide clergymen from government agents. You might be hiding behind a false wall in a linen closet, trying not to sneeze while someone with a goose tattoo is looking for your left leg. As for the violent resolution, well, that's just a poetic retelling of religious enforcement. With stairs. Sweet dreams. Now, if you're thinking, surely we're done with political violence masquerading as playtime jingles, allow me to introduce you to Rockabye Baby. Rockabye Baby on the treetop. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall. And down will come baby, cradle and all. No subtext here. Just a baby plummeting from a tree. Nothing says soothing lullaby like infant mortality. Some theories suggest this rhyme is satirical, mocking the aristocracy and their fragile, precarious hold on power. The baby might represent a royal heir. The tree could symbolize the monarchy. The wind could be political turmoil, rebellion, or just some really strong Tudor-era gossip. Another theory says it's a warning to young mothers not to place their children in high, unstable places. Which seems like it should go without saying, but apparently needed a jingle. Medieval parenting standards were relaxed. But the rhyme endured, probably because it's fun to sing in a creepy whisper while rocking a baby who has no idea they're one shaky branch away from historical symbolism. You shift under the covers. The fire in the hearth has gone out, leaving only the faint smell of wet soot and maybe a burnt rat. The cold creeps in like a tax collector with frostbite. And here comes another rhyme. One you probably sang with a smile. Jack and Jill. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. Another harmless rhyme, right? Wrong. First off, nobody goes up a hill to get water. Water flows downhill, unless you're hauling it from a well, someone buried inconveniently on a scenic overlook. So we're already suspicious. Many believe this rhyme is actually about King Louis XVI of France and Marie Antoinette. Jack loses his crown, decapitation. Jill comes tumbling after, same fate. Blood, revolution, powdered wigs flying in the wind. And suddenly, your adorable hilltop accident is a political execution. Another theory? It references King Charles I and the attempt to reduce the volume of liquid in a pint and a gill, English units of measurement. Yes, people got so mad about water ratios that they immortalized it in rhyme. And of course, there's the very likely possibility it's about two teens sneaking off for a hem recreational purposes, only to suffer an unfortunate accident. Because even in the 1700s, you couldn't just hold hands in peace. So, either way, political beheading, economic protest, or cautionary tale about teen pregnancy. Pick your favorite. All of them end with somebody in pain and public embarrassment. Classic nursery rhyme behavior. Let's roll into something musical. And by musical, we mean trauma with a rhythm. Oranges and lemons. Oranges and lemons. Say the bells of St. Clement's. You owe me 5 farthings. Say the bells of St. Martin's. The rhyme goes on, listing a series of London churches, each one chiming in with financial grievances, existential threats, or casual accusations. It ends with the haunting. Here comes a candle to light you to bed. And here comes a chopper to chop off your head. Wait, what? So we went from citrus fruits and polite billing to a candlelit execution? Yes. Yes, we did. This rhyme is believed to describe the journey of prisoners on their way to execution at Tyburn, London's infamous site for public hangings. The churches mentioned mark locations along the path. The chopper may refer to the final executioner, waiting patiently at the end of your stroll through religious guilt and poor budgeting. Children used to sing this during a game where 2 kids formed an arch and caught others under it. The chop would fall at the final line. It's like Duck Duck Goose, but with more guillotine vibes. Still awake? Impressive. Or possibly cursed. Let's do one more before your brain slides gently into dreamland. This little piggy. This little piggy went to market. This little piggy stayed home. This little piggy had roast beef. This little piggy had none. And this little piggy went wee all the way home. Ah yes, the classic toe-counting rhyme. But have you ever thought about why the first piggy went to market? Spoiler, he wasn't shopping. He was the product. That pig went to market because he was being sold. For meat. Or traded for wool, or barley, or a wheel of cheese wrapped in suspicion. The second pig stays home, temporarily safe. The third pig is eating roast beef, possibly cannibalizing his cousin. The fourth one starving. And the fifth? Clearly having some kind of trauma episode. So yes, this is a rhyme about livestock economics, food insecurity, and porcine existential dread. But it rhymes. So we laugh. While touching toes. History is weird. You curl deeper into your blanket now. The candle flickers. Somewhere in the distance, a cock crows. Or someone dies. Hard to tell, really. You've survived another chapter of hidden horror disguised as playground whimsy. Congratulations. So far, you've learned that executions can rhyme. Priests sometimes live in walls. Royal scandals become pig stories. Babies fall out of trees with alarming frequency. And water is a political minefield. Sleep tight. Unless you're hiding in a lady's chamber refusing to say your prayers. Then maybe, stay awake a little longer. You wake up because someone is screaming. It takes a moment to realize it's you. You've been dreaming about being chased through a 14th century butcher shop by a goose holding a ledger and shouting about unpaid tithes. Again, you sigh. The hearth is dark, the room is colder than a friar's bathwater, and something in the corner might be mold or might be a small deity forming from damp. Hard to say. You reach for your cup of water, only to remember it's actually last week's rain collected in a cracked bowl, now tasting vaguely of wood smoke and plague. Refreshing. So before we dive back into the murky puddle of your childhood's greatest betrayals, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy listening to me ruin nursery rhymes while helping you fall asleep to the sound of medieval despair. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I'm always fascinated by who's wide awake at 3 a.m. Googling, why is Humpty Dumpty a lie? Now, let's return to our collection of softly sinister sing-alongs, each one sugarcoating some deliciously disturbing piece of history. And tonight, we begin with a rhyme about food, poverty, and, of course, economic shame. Say it with me now. Old Mother Hubbard. Old Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard to fetch her poor dog a bone. But when she got there, the cupboard was bare, and so the poor dog had none. This charming little rhyme about canine disappointment is often thought of as harmless, if a bit sad. But, as with all things from the early modern period, it's a light coating of whimsy over a bone-dry carcass of misery. One interpretation suggests it satirizes the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII. Mother Hubbard equals the church. The dog equals the people. The bone equals spiritual and material support. And the cupboard being bare? Well, that's what happens when you dismantle the entire religious infrastructure of a country because your king wants a divorce and a male heir and possibly a sandwich. Another theory links it to Napoleon, because of course it does. People have tried to connect every rhyme to Napoleon at some point. Supposedly, Mother Hubbard is England, the dog is Napoleon, and the bear cupboard represents the refusal to supply aid. Sure. Let's all pretend a starving French general in exile is symbolized by a spaniel looking disappointed in a poorly thatched kitchen. And then there's the boring, obvious explanation, a literal old woman, a literal bear cupboard, and a dog that dies. Because, yes, the rest of the rhyme continues, and spoiler alert, the dog doesn't just go without a bone. He also dies, gets a coffin, a hat, and ends up going to the fair, which raises more questions than it answers. So whether it's about the Reformation, Napoleonic geopolitics, or the tragic loss of a Shih Tzu named Kevin, the message remains clear. Poverty is real, and bones are political. Let's move to something lighter. Like theft, poverty, and punitive violence. You know this one. Ba ba black sheep. Ba, ba, black sheep. Have you any wool? Yes sir, yes sir. 3 bags full. 1 for the master, 1 for the dame, and 1 for the little boy, who lives down the lane. Seems harmless. A sheep, some wool, a fair and balanced distribution of resources. Until you remember this is England, and nothing is ever fairly distributed. The rhyme is often interpreted as a reference to the wool tax of the 13th century under King Edward I, who was the economic engine of medieval England, kind of like what oil is today, except fluffier and harder to ignite. The crown imposed heavy taxes on wool exports, and the rhyme may reflect that structure. 1 share for the king, the master, 1 for the church or nobility, the dame, and the last bit for the poor serf kid down the lane who probably owns 0 sheep, 0 shoes, and an overwhelming sense of being trickled down upon. That black sheep itself has long been a symbol of bad luck or being different. Black wool was less valuable because it couldn't be dyed, and black sheep were rare. So of course it was seen as suspicious, possibly demonic, or worse, economically inefficient. And yet, the sheep still gives up all its wool. Because, you see, in feudal England, even metaphorical livestock must participate in taxation without representation. You pull your blanket up over your shoulders, though the air in your chamber still smells faintly of candle wax, damp stone, and distant peasant anxiety. Next up, a tale of mystery, suspected witchcraft, and what happens when your babysitter is a full-time metaphor. Hey diddle diddle. Hey diddle diddle. The cat and the fiddle. The cow jumped over the moon. The little dog laughed to see such sport, and the dish ran away with the spoon. Ah yes, the fever dream of the nursery rhyme world. Most people assume this is simply nonsense, whimsical and absurd in a Lewis Carroll sort of way. And sure, maybe it is. Or maybe, just maybe, it's coded political satire, as was fashionable in the 17th century when saying things directly got you executed with creativity. One theory suggests the rhyme references the court of Elizabeth I, full of musicians, the fiddle, powerful feminine symbols, the cow, and allegorical references to affairs, scandals, and household treason. The dish and spoon? Possibly an elopement of royal servants. Or a commentary on how all your valuable possessions are just walking off due to theft, debt, or sudden French invasion. Another explanation places the rhyme's origin in ancient pagan lunar worship. The cow jumping over the moon may represent fertility rituals or seasonal cycles, which makes sense if you're standing in a field naked with a candle and hoping for a good barley harvest. Then again, perhaps it really is just absurd, meant to entertain children with the surreal image of crockery developing sentience and committing cutlery-based elopement. Either way, it sounds better than the reality of Elizabethan entertainment, which usually involved watching someone get whipped for sneezing near a bishop. Time for another round of rhyming darkness. There was an old woman who lived in a hue. There was an old woman who lived in a hue. She had so many children, she didn't know what to do. She gave them some broth without any bread, then whipped them all soundly and put them to bed. If you've ever been a parent, a teacher, or someone who has made the tragic mistake of volunteering at a birthday party, this rhyme hits a little too close. But what's the origin? Some believe it references Queen Caroline, wife of George II, who had 8 children and was widely mocked in political cartoons. The hue is symbolic of her household, overflowing with airs and royal drama. The broth without bread? A subtle jab at frugality, or perhaps a commentary on poor maternal leadership. Others say it's a general reflection of poor families during the Industrial Revolution, where living in cramped housing with a dozen children and barely enough food was just Tuesday. And that final line, whip them all soundly and put them to bed, tells you everything you need to know about discipline practices in the pre-TikTok era. No bedtime stories. No screen time negotiations. Just soup and a light flogging. You glance toward your window now. Well, it's more of a hole in the wall covered with a pig bladder, but it technically lets in light. Dawn is trying to rise, fighting through a wall of fog and wood smoke and the lingering regrets of 1,000 shepherds. Still with me? Then it's time we face the darkest of them all. Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. There is no egg. I repeat, Humpty Dumpty. The idea of him being one likely came from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking-Glass in 1871, which illustrated him as a big yoky gentleman in high-stakes existential crisis. But originally, no mention of eggs. Just a fall, a massive failure, and a government response team that was entirely useless. Some scholars suggest Humpty was actually a siege cannon used in the English Civil War, stationed on the walls of Colchester. It fell. It broke. No one could fix it. The king's horses were especially unhelpful, having no mechanical training or opposable thumbs. Others argue Humpty is a metaphor for a fallen leader, a fragile monarch, or the illusion of order breaking apart irreparably. So if you're singing this to your kid, you're really just reminding them that sometimes things shatter and no amount of military intervention can reverse entropy. Which is, frankly, an excellent message to hear right before bedtime. You yawn. You've now endured tales of tax-hating sheep, royal mistresses disguised as dishware, economic despair in footwear, and emotional trauma via egg-shaped metaphor. Your candle sputters. Outside, the chickens are arguing about grain distribution. A dog barks in the distance, possibly at a ghost, possibly at a thief, possibly because it remembers being denied a bone. Sleep is near. And with one final, exhausted breath, you remember. Nothing rhymes in history without a price. You're dreaming again. This time, you're standing in a field. The air smells like wet wool and impending gout. A bell tolls in the distance, though you're not sure if it's for church, plague, or another public execution. You glance down. Your shoes are missing. Again. A nun stares at you from across the field. She's holding a potato and weeping. You're about to ask her why, but, boom, you're awake. Congratulations. You survived another 14th century dreamscape. The room around you is freezing. Your blanket has slid halfway onto the dirt floor and the fire has given up completely. You try to remember what century it is. Based on the smell, it's still 1347. Your teeth chatter. You're fairly certain something scurried across your chest earlier. It may have been a rat or possibly remorse. But enough of that. It's time to tuck you back in with another bouquet of gently cursed melodies. Tonight's theme, the horror of health, the failure of food, and the sheer medieval chaos of attempting survival. Let's begin with a classic, Jack and Jill. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. Sweet, innocent, picturesque, until you realize no one goes up a hill for water. Unless the hill is the only remaining source of untainted liquid following a catastrophic flood, or the bottom of the hill is full of corpses and rats performing a folk dance. Which, knowing medieval Europe, is entirely possible. There are dozens of interpretations of this rhyme, ranging from Scandinavian mythology, Jack and Jill as Juki and Bill, children abducted by the moon god, to French beheadings during the Reign of Terror, Jack and Jill losing their heads, crown equals head, naturally, to a more local and alcoholic origin. Yes, one theory claims Jack and Jill were going up the hill for booze. In the 17th century, a Jack and a Gill were small measures of liquid, used especially for ale or spirits. So the rhyme may describe the consequence of a country couple sneaking off for some secret cider and promptly suffering the indignity of gravity and a steep incline. Possibly followed by death. Possibly followed by an STD. Who's to say? It's also been suggested the rhyme references a tax imposed by King Charles I, which reduced the volume of liquid in a Jack and a Gill proportionally. The falling down might symbolize the diminishing measures and their economic consequences. Because yes, even your bedtime rhymes were used to complain about liquor taxation. And yes, that's the most British thing that's ever happened. So what starts as a pastoral errand turns into a critique of taxation, moon gods, or an unfortunate cider binge. Whichever version you prefer, just remember, Jack fell. His crown broke. And Jill, the ride or die icon that she is, followed him straight into the abyss. No helmet. No regrets. You roll onto your side now. Your pillow is, well, it's not a pillow. It's a sack of turnips wrapped in cloth, and it smells vaguely of mold and missed opportunities. But it does the job. Ready for another? Good. Ring around the rosy. Ring around the rosy. A pocket full of posies. Ashes, ashes. We all fall down. Ah yes. The unofficial theme song of the Black Death. The rumor that refuses to die, ironically, much like the plague itself. The popular explanation goes like this: ring around the rosy refers to the red rash of the bubonic plague. A pocket full of posies represents the herbs people carried to ward off the smell of death. Ashes, ashes, bodies being cremated. And we all fall down. Well, that one's obvious. Mortality rates were higher than your average TikTok trend lifespan. Except that interpretation isn't fully supported by evidence. The rhyme wasn't recorded in its current form until the late 19th century, centuries after the plague. Earlier versions often changed the ashes to atishu, a sneeze, perhaps, or a nod to seasonal hay fever. So while the imagery fits the 1340s disturbingly well, the timeline's a bit wobbly. But still, it feels like the plague. The sing-song melody. The idea of dancing in a circle, collapsing dramatically. It fits the aesthetic of a society that regularly had to decide whether to flee their village or marry off their 11-year-old daughter to the baker in exchange for 3 loaves and a half-dead goat. So whether it's about literal plague, symbolic decay, or just Victorian children being casually macabre, the lesson is clear. Even songs about flowers are probably about death. You pull your blanket tighter. Something skitters in the rafters above you. You ignore it. You are one with the history now. You are the peasant. You are the posy. You are the ash. And next comes a rhyme about actual crimes. Tom, Tom, the piper's son. Tom, Tom, the piper's son, stole a pig and away did run. The pig was eat, and Tom was beat. And Tom went crying down the street. Lovely. A moral tale for children. Crime, punishment, and pork-based misadventure. But it's more than that. Piper's son suggests a working-class boy, son of a musician, probably poor, possibly itinerant. Stole a pig. Well, in Old English usage, pig could mean either an actual animal or a small meat pie. So he may have stolen livestock or lunch. Either way, he eats it. Which makes sense. Because you would too, if you hadn't seen real protein since Candlemas. Then he's caught. He's beaten. And he cries. This is what passed for character development in 17th century England. Steal. Eat. Suffer. Cry. Repent. Repeat. You can almost imagine this being used in a Sunday school somewhere, sung sweetly to the tune of Don't Steal or You'll Be Flogged Behind the Butcher's Stall. And again, this isn't some metaphorical tale of justice. This is just daily life in Tudor England, where petty theft of food was punishable by public humiliation, a beating, or worse. The rhyme doesn't tell us who beat him. Was it his father? The butcher? The local constable with a drinking problem and a twitchy elbow? We'll never know. What we do know is that he ends up crying in the street. Which, again, is just called Tuesday in medieval England. You shift slightly. Your mattress, a generous term, wheezes beneath you. It's stuffed with straw, some mildew, and possibly a hedgehog. You don't have a heart to check. Moving on. Merry, merry, quite contrary. Merry, merry, quite contrary. How does your garden grow? With silver bells and cockle shells, and pretty maids all in a row. Sweet Mary. So contrary. This rhyme sounds like a gentle inquiry about horticulture. But as with all things floral in the Middle Ages, it's probably about torture devices and religious murder. One popular interpretation claims it's about Mary the First of England, also known as Bloody Mary, who restored Catholicism with such vigor that over 280 Protestants were burned at the stake during her 5-year reign. Let's break it down. Quite contrary refers to her opposition to Protestant reforms. How does your garden grow? A sarcastic reference to the growing count of executions. Silver bells and cockle shells, allegedly code for torture devices. Silver bells might be thumbscrews. Cockle shells? Possibly instruments of, let's just say, discomfort for male heretics. Pretty maids all in a row. Guillotines. Or maybe just rows of grave markers. Suddenly this peaceful garden looks more like a well-maintained mass grave. It's also been speculated that the rhyme refers to Catholic symbolism, the cockle shell associated with pilgrimage, think Camino de Santiago, and the bells with church rituals. But let's be honest, nothing in this garden is going to win Best in Show at the local Renaissance fair. You yawn. Your breath fogs in the air. A rooster cries in the distance. He's early. Or possibly just existentially confused. That's fair. So are we all. Let's end this chapter with something soft. Something sweet. Something that, just once, isn't secretly about execution. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. How I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high. Like a diamond in the sky. Finally, a lullaby not about taxation or peasant death. This one dates back to a poem by Jane Taylor in 1806. It has no known connection to kings, plagues, or livestock theft. It's about awe, curiosity, stars. Though if you really wanted to ruin it, and of course, we do, you could mention that during the time this poem was written, the average English child had about a 1 in 3 chance of surviving to adulthood. So looking up at the sky and wondering what stars were made of was possibly a luxury afforded by children whose lungs hadn't been filled with coal dust and existential dread. Still, it's pretty. And for once, no one falls down a hill, catches fire, or loses their livestock. You feel your eyelids growing heavy now. Your fingers curl gently around your wool blanket, which has been patched more times than the moral fabric of medieval society. The fire is out. The room is dark. And above you, through a crack in the thatched roof, a single star winks down. Don't worry. It's probably not watching you. Hey, diddle diddle. Hey, diddle diddle. The cat and the fiddle. The cow jumped over the moon. The little dog laughed to see such sport. And the dish ran away with the spoon. Now, on the surface, this seems like it was written by a toddler on a sugar high with access to rhyming dictionaries and zero adult supervision. But as always, things get darker the longer you stare at them. Like oil paintings or your neighbor's medieval stew. Let's begin with the cat. Cats, in medieval folklore, were not exactly the fluffy meme generators we know today. They were, at various times, considered familiars of witches, demonic messengers, or untrustworthy free agents. A fiddling cat might suggest chaos, trickery, or some sort of woodland rave. The cow jumping over the moon? Symbolic absurdity. Or, depending on your level of historical conspiracy, it could represent the triumph of the impossible, a bovine rebellion against gravitational norms. This was the 16th century equivalent of YOLO. The little dog laughing? Dogs don't laugh. You know what does laugh hysterically in old British folklore? Goblins, tricksters, chaos spirits. So that laughing dog might not be a dog. It might be a folklore hallucination. But sure, let's pretend it's a spaniel enjoying some lunar-based bovine acrobatics. And finally, the dish and spoon elopement. Romantic? Absolutely. But also a subtle jab at the kitchen staff of the era, who were notoriously overworked, underpaid, and prone to accidentally losing cutlery. A dish and a spoon running away was likely a metaphor for theft, or at least for losing your best pewter servingware to some poorly supervised apprentice with sticky fingers and dreams of Paris. The rhyme dates back to the late 16th century, but fragments of it show up even earlier, as bits of nonsense verse and tavern song. Think of it as the Elizabethan version of a meme, absurd, catchy, and vaguely concerning. So while your innocent infant self imagined a joyful dinner set prancing beneath the stars, your ancestors likely thought, yes, a thinly veiled tale of theft, animal mockery, and madness. Perfect bedtime material. You roll over slightly. Your arm brushes the cold wall. It feels like sadness. Let's go deeper. Goosey goosey gander. Goosey goosey gander. Whither shall I wander? Upstairs and downstairs. And in my lady's chamber. There I met an old man, who wouldn't say his prayers. So I took him by his left leg, and threw him down the stairs. This is where it gets delightfully violent. On the surface, this sounds like the internal monologue of a goose with anger management issues. But the rhyme is most likely a reference to anti-Catholic sentiment in post-Reformation England. Let's break it down. The old man who wouldn't say his prayers was likely a reference to Catholic priests, who were forced into hiding during the reign of Protestant monarchs, especially under Elizabeth I. These priests would often be concealed in so-called priest holes within houses, hidden compartments under stairs, behind walls, even inside chimneys. If they were discovered, well, it usually didn't end with a gentle conversation about religious freedom. The line "threw him down the stairs" is almost certainly a metaphor for violent removal, interrogation, or execution. Even the goose imagery may carry symbolic weight. In medieval times, the goose was sometimes associated with lust or foolishness, depending on context. Or maybe it's just there to rhyme. The rhyme itself comes from a late 18th century in print, but likely circulated orally for much longer. So, to recap, you, as a child, were lulled to sleep by a story of someone breaking into a woman's room, finding a secret Catholic, and hurling him downstairs like a bag of heretical laundry. Sleep well. You pull your blanket tighter. A breeze sneaks through the cracks in your door. It smells like rain, mud, and the ghost of someone who didn't pay their tithes. Next up, Little Miss Muffet. Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet, eating her curds and whey. Along came a spider, who sat down beside her, and frightened Miss Muffet away. Simple, frightening, dairy-based. This rhyme dates back to the early 19th century, though the idea of a young girl eating curds and whey is deeply medieval. That's cottage cheese, essentially. Imagine lumpy milk with a side of abandonment issues. Now, theories abound about who Miss Muffet was. One suggestion is that she was Patience Muffet, daughter of Dr. Thomas Muffet, a 16th century English physician who wrote about insects and nutrition. If this is true, it means her father was responsible for both her dietary habits and her future arachnophobia. This could also be a veiled reference to feminine delicacy, or more darkly, vulnerability. The image of a young woman being startled by something as small as a spider taps into a long-standing literary trope, the fragile maiden undone by the horrors of nature. But in a time where actual horrors included famine, child mortality, and toothless dentistry, being afraid of a spider seems oddly relatable. So Miss Muffet flees. And the spider? Perhaps it wasn't just a spider. Perhaps it was an allegory for sexual danger, religious corruption, or political surveillance. Or, perhaps, and hear me out, it was just a spider. A big hairy one. The kind that lives behind your bed and waits for you to fall asleep. You shift slightly in your bed. There's a tickle on your ankle. You pretend it's not a spider. Let's keep going. There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children, she didn't know what to do. She gave them some broth without any bread, then whipped them all soundly and put them to bed. Ah yes, the medieval childcare guide. This one is a favorite for obvious reasons. Shoes are not known for their habitable interior space, and the idea of a woman cramming multiple children into footwear is delightfully absurd, and just a bit depressing. The rhyme appears in print as early as 1794, and is often interpreted as a satire of maternal poverty, or possibly even commentary on Queen Caroline, wife of George II, who had 8 children and was frequently mocked in contemporary political cartoons. But even stripped of political satire, the message is clear: this woman is overwhelmed. The children are many. The resources are few. The discipline is, shall we say, robust. No bread, just broth, and a sound whipping. This was considered whimsical. Imagine reading this to a toddler in modern times. She didn't have food, and so she used physical punishment to manage her household chaos. Good night, sweetheart. In truth, many rhymes like this functioned as warnings, moral guides, or simply as a reflection of daily reality, hunger, overcrowding, and stress. But they were coded in rhyme and rhythm to make the medicine and the trauma go down a little easier. You sigh. The room is still cold. You breathe out and watch your breath curl upward like a ghost that's had enough. Let's close this chapter with something almost hopeful. Ba ba black sheep. Ba. Ba, black sheep. Have you any wool? Yes, sir, 3 bags full. 1 for the master, 1 for the dame, and 1 for the little boy, who lives down the lane. So innocent, so cuddly, so completely about feudal taxation. This rhyme, which first appeared in print in 1731, is widely interpreted as referencing the wool tax of 1275, imposed during the reign of Edward I. Wool was England's main export, and the crown wasn't about to miss out on that sweet, soft revenue. The rhyme likely reflects resentment toward this wool tax, which demanded a share from every production, 1/3 to the king, the master, 1/3 to the church, the dame, and 1/3 to the farmer or child, the little boy. This distribution was, of course, completely equitable. If you were a noble, if you were a peasant, well, you got lice. There's also been speculation about the rhyme's racial overtones, but historical evidence suggests it was originally about economics, not ethnicity. So next time you hear a child singing about a black sheep, just remember, it's a tiny protest song about taxes, sung by someone who probably can't reach the table. And that, dear sleeper, is how we end this chapter. Nonsense verse, dairy-based meals, goose-related violence, and shoes filled with screaming. You're still awake? Remarkable. Humpty Dumpty. Yes, him. That portly fellow who fell off a wall and shattered into irreparable fragments while a bizarre number of horses attempted orthopedic surgery. Let's recite the classic, shall we? Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. 4 lines. Infinite questions. Who was Humpty? Why was he on a wall? Why were horses trying to fix him? And why is this the poetic equivalent of watching a slow-motion train derailment narrated by barn animals? You, laying there half asleep with one foot in the abyss of dreamland, probably assumed Humpty Dumpty was an egg. Everyone thinks that. But allow me to ruin that for you gently, like peeling off a Band-Aid made of pudding. Humpty Dumpty was never originally an egg. That image, the smiling ovular tragedy with limbs, is courtesy of Lewis Carroll in Through the Looking-Glass, 1871, who described Humpty as an anthropomorphic egg in his typically chaotic Wonderland style. But in the earliest known versions, Humpty Dumpty was just a thing. A name. Possibly a person. Possibly a siege weapon. Let's explore. One theory suggests that Humpty Dumpty was royalist cannon used during the English Civil War in the 1640s, specifically during the Siege of Colchester. According to this hypothesis, a great cannon atop the wall was destroyed by parliamentarian forces, and no one, not even all the king's horses and all the king's men, could repair it. Which makes sense. Horses are notoriously terrible at metalwork. This would turn the rhyme into a kind of battlefield lament. A child's version of a war story. The image of a broken weapon, symbolic of lost cause and splintered monarchy. Another possibility is that Humpty Dumpty was a nickname, slang for a clumsy, overweight person in the 17th century. Basically, if you look like a wine barrel with legs and had the balance of a goat on roller skates, congratulations, you were a Humpty Dumpty. So Humpty might have been just some unfortunate man of spherical proportions who made the poor architectural choice of perching himself on a high wall. Which, frankly, sounds like the 17th century version of a TikTok stunt gone wrong. Either way, whether canon or clumsy noble, the ending is always the same. He falls, he shatters, and nobody can fix him. Now, that's a comforting bedtime thought, isn't it? You fall. You break. Everyone comes running, including horses for some reason, and they all fail. So go to sleep. But, don't fall off anything. Let's move to something less egg-based but no less emotionally questionable. Jack and Jill. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. A classic. The story of 2 children ascending a hill for the worst reason possible, to get water, only to tumble down like poorly balanced bread loaves. You may not have noticed, but hills are not good places to get water. Water, as you may recall, flows downhill. So this rhyme starts suspiciously. Now, historians have theories. One popular explanation is that this is a satirical rhyme about the taxation of liquids. Yes, even when children are breaking their skulls, it's still about taxes. According to one interpretation, Jack and Jill refers to King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, Jack losing his crown being a not-so-subtle nod to being guillotined, and Jill tumbling after being Marie's subsequent execution. However, this is complicated by the rhyme appearing in England long before the French Revolution, dating back at least to the 1760s in some printed forms. Another theory? The rhyme might originate from Scandinavian mythology, where Juki and Bill, siblings, are taken by the moon while fetching water. They appear in the sky, which some say is the mythological basis for moon craters. You heard that correctly. Your childhood rhyme is secretly ancient Norse cosmology filtered through 18th century nonsense verse. But yet another theory, and arguably the most British of all, is that it's just about two kids who got hurt doing chores. Nothing more. Just your standard medieval trauma tale wrapped in gentle rhymes. So next time someone fondly recites Jack and Jill, remember, it's either a myth about lunar abduction, a political allegory for royal decapitation, or just poorly planned hydration strategy. You turn in bed. The pillow has warmed unpleasantly. You flip it. Cool side restored. Onward. London Bridge is falling down. You know the tune. It's hypnotic, chant-like, and utterly devoid of hope. London Bridge is falling down. Falling down, falling down. London Bridge is falling down. My fair lady. What begins as a catchy little refrain about urban collapse soon spirals into a series of fruitless construction attempts. Various building materials are tried: wood, stone, iron, gold. Nothing holds. The bridge keeps collapsing, which is less of a nursery rhyme and more of an infrastructure horror story. But here's the thing, London Bridge really did keep falling down. The structure was repeatedly destroyed or decayed over centuries by fire, flood, ice, Viking raids, and general architectural sadness. The earliest bridges across the Thames date back to Roman Britain, but the most infamous iteration, built in the 12th century, was a medieval marvel, packed with houses, shops, even a chapel. It was like a mall and a highway had a baby, and then put that baby directly on top of a river. This version of London Bridge had actual heads on spikes. Yes, traitors' heads were impaled on the southern gatehouse as a warning to all. So when we sing London Bridge is falling down, it's less a metaphor and more of a live update. One darker interpretation suggests the rhyme may refer to the legend of human sacrifice, that children were allegedly buried in the foundations of bridges to ensure stability. There's no real evidence for this practice in England, but the story persists in folklore, and the fair lady might be a reference to a noblewoman sacrificed for the sake of architecture. So, the next time you absent-mindedly hum this song, try to imagine it being sung by workmen who just discovered that the bridge collapsed again, possibly due to bad materials, or ghosts, or sabotage, while casually balancing lunch on the skull of a former traitor. Restful. Still with me? You've now reached the stage of the evening where your limbs feel like damp velvet and your thoughts are composed entirely of breadcrumbs and fog. Perfect timing for 3 blind mice. 3 blind mice. 3 blind mice. See how they run. See how they run. They all ran after the farmer's wife, who cut off their tails with a carving knife. Did you ever see such a thing in your life as 3 blind mice? First off, why are they blind? Why are they running toward a woman with a knife? And what kind of social event is this? This cheery little rhyme is generally believed to be an allusion to the reign of Queen Mary I, also known as Bloody Mary. You'll recall, or maybe you won't, because you wisely chose to not specialize in Tudor-based drama, that Mary was famous for her persecution of Protestants. The 3 blind mice are often interpreted as 3 Protestant noblemen, possibly the Oxford martyrs, Hugh Latimer, Nicholas Ridley, and Thomas Cranmer, who conspired against the Catholic Queen and were subsequently executed. The farmer's wife would be Mary herself, wielding the metaphorical and very real carving knife of state-sanctioned murder. In this light, the rhyme becomes less about mice and more about the consequences of political dissent in a time when treason was less a fine and more we light you on fire in public. The blindness might symbolize religious ignorance or spiritual blindness, or simply be a metaphor for helplessness. So, in summary, this is a song about religious oppression, state violence, and bodily mutilation. But it's got a catchy melody, so let's all clap along. You exhale slowly. You've officially passed through the veil of meaning and are now just floating in a world of historical oddities and poetic violence. We could keep going, but this feels like a good place to pause for breath. Because in Chapter 9, we'll look at the rhymes that got banned, censored, or rewritten for being too dark, too political, or too real for polite society. The ones that never made it into your bedtime routine. The ones whispered in taverns, scrawled in margins, and occasionally mumbled by slightly inebriated peasants who thought they were being clever. So sleep if you can. Your childhood wasn't what you thought it was. But at least now, you know why. These are the rhymes that almost made it to your bedtime routine, but got swept under the heavily perfumed rug of censorship and societal panic. The ones whispered behind tankards and taverns. The ones rewritten so the royal family wouldn't feel called out. The ones about execution, sedition, and livestock-related crimes that were, apparently, just a little too real for the kids. Let's begin, as all good things do, with a heresy charge and a mild beheading. You're lying there, warm under your blanket, eyelids heavy, and yet, it's time to talk about possibly the most banned nursery rhyme of them all. Goosey, goosey, gander. Goosey, goosey, gander. Whither shall I wander? Upstairs and downstairs. And in my lady's chamber. There I met an old man, who wouldn't say his prayers. So I took him by his left leg, and threw him down the stairs. Now, on the surface, this sounds like a weird little goose-related home invasion, which, in most contexts, would be plenty disturbing. But this one? It goes deeper. The old man who wouldn't say his prayers is commonly interpreted as a Catholic priest hiding during a time of Protestant rule, likely during the 16th or 17th centuries, when harboring a Catholic could get you a nice, scenic execution. See, when Catholicism was outlawed under Elizabeth I, many Catholic priests hid in secret compartments known as priest holes. These were tiny, suffocating hideaways often built into the walls or under the stairs of wealthy recusant homes, basically medieval crawl spaces full of dust and anxiety. And if you were caught harboring one, congratulations, you were committing treason. So, the narrator of this rhyme, who gleefully yeets an old man down the stairs, may actually be a Protestant enforcer, delighting in flushing out secret Catholics who refuse to say the new official English prayers. Which adds a delightful bit of theological violence to your childhood memory, doesn't it? And that's why Goosey Goosey Gander got itself quietly sanitized in some versions. Because throwing elderly clergy down the stairs while breaking into women's bedrooms wasn't quite the image the Victorians wanted on needlepoint. Let's stay on the theme of religious intolerance and merrily slide into the 5 little pigs. This little piggy went to market. This little piggy stayed home. This little piggy had roast beef. This little piggy had none. And this little piggy cried wee 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 all the way home. This rhyme feels innocent, right? A bit of toe-wiggling fun. 5 piggies. 1 carnivore. 1 with a probable iron deficiency. 1 who overreacts. But why is the first pig going to market? Not to shop, dear listener. To be sold. That pig is not browsing for a new hat. That pig is bacon-bound. So if you translate the piggies into medieval peasants, which, in some grim readings, people have, this becomes a tale of economic inequality. The first pig is sacrificed to the market. The second is the peasant who stays home and survives. The third is the landlord or noble who feasts. The fourth starves. And the fifth, well, that's just you, screaming internally in a world that makes no sense. The rhyme dates back to at least the 18th century, and while it's mostly interpreted now as harmless nonsense, some folklorists see this as a commentary on rural poverty, food distribution, and the general trauma of being alive in pre-industrial England. Also, pigs don't eat roast beef, which should be your first clue that something deeply symbolic or entirely deranged is happening here. Speaking of unsettling dietary habits, let's continue with Sing a Song of Sixpence. Sing a song of sixpence. A pocket full of rye. 24 blackbirds. Baked in a pie. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. Wasn't that a dainty dish to set before the king? Yes, yes. A pie filled with live birds. You've heard this one. Possibly even recited it while blissfully unaware that this is culinary horror. In the Middle Ages, this wasn't just a rhyme. It was sometimes an actual thing. Live birds baked into pies was a spectacle used to entertain the very, very bored and very, very wealthy. Imagine a banquet. A flaky golden pie is presented to your local monarch, and when the crust is cut, out fly 24 startled blackbirds, presumably angry and covered in lard. You would laugh, because it's not you in the pie. But deeper interpretations exist. Some suggest this rhyme is a coded political allegory. The king is the monarchy. The queen in the parlor is possibly Elizabeth I. The maid hamming out the clothes gets her nose pecked off, which may or may not be a commentary on common folk suffering while the elites play with bird-filled desserts. This rhyme was sanitized repeatedly, and even banned in certain contexts, not because of the pastry violence, but because it was seen as mocking the royal court. And that, in Tudor England, could get your tongue removed. Or worse, force you to attend court poetry readings. We drift now into darker waters. Let's talk about Solomon Grundy. Solomon Grundy, born on a Monday, christened on Tuesday, married on Wednesday, took ill on Thursday, worse on Friday, died on Saturday, buried on Sunday. That was the end of Solomon Grundy. Ah yes, the full lifespan of a human being compressed into 8 lines. Childhood existential dread in nursery rhyme form. This wasn't banned per se, but in the Victorian period, there were attempts to soften or remove it from school books because of its overt morbid tone. No one wanted little Timmy contemplating mortality before arithmetic. But Grundy, if he even existed, may have represented the ephemeral nature of life, especially among the working class. If you were a peasant or laborer in medieval or early modern England, your life expectancy was short, your work backbreaking, and your death a mostly bureaucratic inconvenience. The name Grundy is believed to have originated in the 19th century, but similar poems existed earlier, particularly in religious or didactic texts designed to teach children about the stages of life and inevitability of death. Sleep well. Now we come to the most notorious nursery rhyme, to be rewritten over and over. Bah, bah, black sheep. Bah, bah, black sheep. Have you any wool? Yes, sir, yes, sir. 3 bags full. 1 for the master, 1 for the dame, and 1 for the little boy, who lives down the lane. Sounds innocent. But then you ask, why is this sheep being taxed? This rhyme is widely believed to have been a commentary on the wool tax imposed during the 13th century under King Edward I, where producers were forced to give a portion of their wool to the crown. The rhyme might reflect resentment from rural shepherds or merchants forced to comply. In the 20th century, the rhyme underwent sanitization in several English schools, especially in the 1980s and 1990s, with versions replacing black sheep with rainbow sheep or any wool with some wool in order to avoid perceived racial overtones, despite no original connection to race. What began as a complaint about medieval tax policy became a battleground for modern cultural debate, proving, once again, that no one can agree on anything, not even sheep-based rhymes. Take a deep breath. Your mind is now swirling with images of pies stuffed with birds, clandestine Catholic stare-tossing, and economic resentment expressed through livestock. We're deep in the swamp now. And yet, there's more. Let's not pretend you haven't heard it. Let's not pretend it didn't haunt your childhood. Ring-a-ring-o roses. A pocket full of posies. 8 a shoe. 8 a shoe. We all fall down. Simple. Sing-songy. Often accompanied by children joyfully forming a circle, sneezing with performative enthusiasm, then dramatically collapsing to the ground like little plague-ridden flowers. Adorable. Except, you've probably heard the urban legend. You know, the one that says this is about the Black Death. That the roses are plague sores, the posies are herbal remedies stuffed in your pockets to ward off the disease, the sneezing is a symptom, and we all fall down is death. Sudden, community-wide death. It's the musical equivalent of a funeral dirge with finger painting. But here's the kicker, modern folklorists can't agree on whether this interpretation is actually true. Some believe the rhyme's connection to the plague is a myth, a Victorian-era theory given way too much credit by people who just really love a good morbid twist. The earliest known printed version of this rhyme dates to the late 19th century, long after the original bubonic party bus rolled through Europe. That's a pretty big gap. Enough time for the meaning to evolve, mutate, or be entirely misremembered by someone with a fondness for poetic misery. Still, whether or not it's literally about the Black Death, it's undeniable that people lived through centuries where sickness was everywhere. If it wasn't plague, it was typhus. If not that, smallpox. Or dysentery. Or just the local baker sneezing directly into your rye loaf. Germ theory hadn't RSVP'd to the century yet. Let's go back in time, just for fun. Close your eyes. You wake up in the year 1348, in a small English village. You've got a sore throat. Bad sign. So does your neighbor. And his goats. There's a strange smell in the air, not unusual, but this one is particularly putrid. Within days, half your village is either dead or pretending to be. And what do the children do? They make up songs. Because humans, even when rotting from the inside out, really love a catchy tune. This brings us to the more interesting fact. Rhymes like Ring Around the Rosie may not literally be about the plague, but they reflect a culture so deeply steeped in mortality that death was just another character in the bedtime routine. And sometimes, the best way to survive the unbearable is to sing through it. Let's explore a few other rhymes that may, or may not, have been plague-adjacent. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that people have always had a deeply weird sense of humor in the face of doom. London Bridge is falling down. London Bridge is falling down. Falling down, falling down. London Bridge is falling down. My Fair Lady. Sounds charming. Until you realize that this song is basically about infrastructure collapse, political instability, and, depending on the version, human sacrifice. Yes, human sacrifice. Some legends, completely unproven but widely circulated in folk traditions, claim that when London Bridge was first built, a child was entombed within its foundations to keep the bridge sturdy. You know, for spiritual balance. Or possibly because the architect was having a very bad week. Versions of this rhyme exist in multiple languages and cultures. The Norwegians, the Germans, the French, all with their own songs about bridges falling down, which suggests that this wasn't just a British problem. Europe in the Middle Ages had one shared language, abject paranoia about buildings collapsing and taking half the town with them. So the next time you hum this little ditty, remember, you might be singing about the failure of civic engineering, the decay of medieval London, or an urban legend involving entombed children. Sweet dreams. Now, let's take a brief stroll through a lesser-known, yet equally unsettling rhyme. Here we go round the mulberry bush. Often sung as a cheerful movement game, usually by children circling a pretend mulberry bush in gym class while wearing suspiciously thin socks on cold floors. Here we go round the mulberry bush. The mulberry bush, the mulberry bush. Here we go round the mulberry bush. So early in the morning. Innocent, right? Except this rhyme is said to originate from Wakefield Prison in England. And the mulberry bush wasn't some cheerful shrub. It was supposedly an actual tree planted in the prison yard, around which female prisoners were made to exercise. Yes, you heard that right. This isn't just a morning routine song. It may be a forced labor chant from a 19th century correctional facility. The full version includes verses about washing clothes, brushing hair, and other domestic chores, all allegedly reflecting the routine of incarcerated women. It's like Orange is the New Black, but with more corsets and fewer plot arcs. You begin to see a theme, don't you? Childhood nursery rhymes, simple, pleasant, repetitive, often mask a grim cultural history. Because for most of recorded time, life was hard, short, and usually ended with a cough, a fever, or a strange doctor telling you to try more leeches. So what did people do? They took their trauma, their fear, their suffering, and they turned it into rhymes. Repetition became memory. Rhythm became resistance. Rhyme became survival. It was easier to sing about death than to talk about it. Now, let's turn to a rhyme that sounds sweet, but has a backstory that feels like a Victorian crime novel. Merry, merry, quite contrary. Merry, merry, quite contrary. How does your garden grow? With silver bells and cockle shells, and pretty maids all in a row. This one? It's probably about Mary the First of England, also known as Bloody Mary, the Catholic queen who spent a good chunk of her reign enthusiastically executing Protestants. Let's unpack this, petal by petal. The garden may represent the graveyards growing rapidly under her reign. Silver bells and cockle shells? Not charming gardening tools. Possibly torture devices. Yes, silver bells were said to be thumbscrews. Cockle shells may have been, well, let's just say unpleasant things used on people's sensitive bits. History is unclear, but none of it smells like roses. And the pretty maids all in a row. Some believe this refers to the guillotine, nicknamed the Maiden, or perhaps her numerous ladies-in-waiting, many of whom met terrible fates. So next time you hear this rhyme quoted during a sweet scene in a period drama, remember, it might be less about a whimsical garden and more about a bloody reign of terror. Soothing, isn't it? Take another breath. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. You are floating now in a warm cocoon of softly spoken atrocity. A quilt stitched from songs about livestock taxation, religious persecution, and ritualized beheadings. Comforting, really. But there's one more thread to tug before we close this chapter. 3 blind mice. 3 blind mice, 3 blind mice. See how they run, see how they run. They all ran after the farmer's wife, who cut off their tails with a carving knife. There's a cheerful thought for bedtime. Mutilated rodents. Perfect for toddlers. But this rhyme too has a historical shadow. It may refer to the execution of 3 Protestant nobles during the reign of, once again, Mary I. The farmer's wife is Mary. The 3 blind mice are noblemen who conspired against her, possibly the Oxford martyrs, Hugh Latimer, Nicholas Ridley, and Thomas Cranmer. Spoiler alert, all 3 were burned at the stake. No tales involved, but certainly a lack of happy endings. Of course, the rhyme could also be a simple tale of agricultural rodent control told through rhyming horror. Who knows? But that's the beauty of all these rhymes. They exist in a kind of historical fog, part memory, part myth, part allegory. Like everything from the medieval and early modern periods, they were oral traditions, passed down, mutated, and often repackaged with just enough cheerfulness to slip past the censors. By the time you sang them, they were harmless. But their DNA, their origins, rotten with context. So rest now, knowing your childhood lullabies were built on a foundation of suffering, state violence, public execution, and surprisingly aggressive poultry.